Jan Dalsten from the National Archives of Denmark. He's head of data science there and a long-time leader in digital records appraisal and transfer. So Jan, how do you navigate the tension between national specific needs and the push for harmonized long-term preservation strategies at the European level, particularly as you were involved in the development of CRDK?
Yeah, that's a good question, because obviously when you try to standardize in a field where you have 27 different countries within the European community, and all countries have their own little things they want to put into a standard or they want to avoid in a standard. I think when you standardize, first of all, you need to think about what is the purpose of this particular standardization, because if the purpose is to get a common language, then you might be a little less strict than if the purpose is that you can use the exact same types of IT systems for a particular task. So you need to define the purpose of the standardization, because that will help you figure out how much effort should you put into making the standardization strict. So I think I generally would say standardization should probably, I'm not sure this is all true, but I'll try it. I think standardization should be as flexible as possible and as strict as necessary, so that you make room for flexibility, but still be strict where it really matters. And again, coming back to, we need to figure out the purpose of the standardization in order to figure out where to put flexible, strict, and something in between. And then also, I think in any type of standardization, it's super important that the business case is obvious for those who should use the standard. If they can see that there is a business case in developing and using a standard, I think we all might be more inclined to be flexible with our own requirements if we can see the business case. So that would also be a point to take into consideration.
And what do you think? So others, have they seen their requirements also reflected in what you developed in CRDK, or was this the feeling more that you were taking the boat in one direction and the others were not following?
I think in the development of CRDK, and I hope that Anders Bo can help me here, one of the things was that we needed to make sure that it would work in our environment, for instance, with the documents where we had a specific way of doing things, and we needed to make sure that it would work in that particular environment. Is that, yeah.
Thanks, Jan. So that brings me to Anders Bo Nielsen, Senior Advisor at the Danish National Archives, who defined the database information package layout for e-ARK, for the databases, and he's very familiar with that, was leading the CRDK work and also e-ARK activities. So I think you have a very deep technical understanding also of this standard. So what is in your experience in dealing with very large databases and the challenge trying to define European standards in this area?
Thank you. Well, first of all, when we're speaking about very large databases, it can either be the ordinary table data or more frequently the amount of large objects that one finds next to it. And these days we are facing table data in the area of terabytes by itself, and 30, 40 terabytes, that's unusual for a submission which has maybe a 5-year time span. So, of course, what is the biggest problem here compared to the actual standards is that you have to, as we just were talking about here, think about what is the actual interest of the other ones who's participating in that standardization. And as I also had in my presentation, it took 11 years before we got the rest of the group having the same needs as we had for creating a support for a large amount of data, not just tables, but especially the handling of large objects, files, that is. And I guess one should then, next time, be more careful, and if you have special needs which cannot be fulfilled within the group, make certain that you make those requirements next to the requirements we all can agree upon, and make certain that they are interoperable. So if you do it in that way, you will not stop or break or bend any kind of regulation made in the common good. So hopefully try to agree as much as possible, even though we may be at different stages of the amount of data we're receiving and the different archives being then public or private, but make certain that you can have as interoperable specifications as possible. As Jan said, that you should be as almost loose as you can, and no stricter than necessary. And that is definitely a lesson for the next specifications we will be making.
And could you elaborate a bit more on the eArch specifications themselves? So what was your experience in the eArch specifications helping you with the handling of large data sets?
I would say that the part of the problems we had was the lack in the first place of segmentation that I spoke about when it comes specifically to eArch. It took quite some time before we were there. We could say now we can also, like in CDK, make certain that you can have the nice package size that you need for the data you have to handle, both for the actual validation, but also for the further cloud storage and later on also giving access to it. We got it in there, and there's nothing directly in the current eArch which is making it impossible to do the same for the CSIPs. And we're also trying out to figure good ways to segmenting CSIPs when you have terabytes. Nobody likes to deal with a 3 terabyte file. You want to have them chopped into more manageable sizes. And of course, the main reason for why we didn't do that up front was that the other partners didn't have that need. So when only one partner has a specific need, you have to figure out how to handle that in order not to break the common specification and just wait for the others to get there in the meantime. Even though it sounds very tedious to be able to, or have to do more of the same work, more or less, building a separate spec next to it, but that's the way to do it, as I see it.
Thanks. So let's go to Koit. Koit, from a practical implementation perspective, so what are the biggest technical or resource challenges you've encountered when using CR tools? Especially, what is your experience with limited human resources, people that can support in the tasks you were doing?
I would say that there's probably not like one or a few well-defined challenges that we're constantly wrestling with, but all kinds of challenges come up at, I don't know, unpredictable points, and then we need to tackle them somehow, and then just when we have gotten to celebrating the big win, we discover a new one. And some of them are like teeny tiny technical issues, some are bigger ones, some are ridiculous ones. So I thought maybe I'll give you an example. One issue is that size in the system of, or the environment of the agency that is about to transfer a database to us can be a big issue. Sometimes they run their systems in cloud environments where storage space is very costly. And when you want to produce this database snapshot, it's not obvious at first, but actually you need multiple times the space just to produce this database. Because let's say we have a database that's altogether 1 terabyte. But then when we produce this CR snapshot, first we need to clone the original database to make sure that it does not change while the snapshot is being created. So you can't snapshot a live database properly. So we need another terabyte. But then the snapshot itself is also roughly the same size as the original database. So that's already a 3rd terabyte. And then to transfer it efficiently to the National Archives using FTP connection, you would want to avoid having 1 million files going through one by one because it's super slow. There is an overhead with every file. So you would want to zip it into one big file. that's a 4th terabyte. And these terabytes can be pretty expensive for these agencies, and you definitely need to know, regardless of price, well in advance that you will need that much space. And there's also more fine details with these extra lobes or large objects, which are files outside the main database. You need to also these to calculate these properly. So this type of issues need to be taken into account. Or sometimes we have like totally ridiculous issues. Like one case we had with a population registry, or actually a subsection with it. They transferred it like I think it was about 1 terabyte of certain data from certain tables, and we felt that it arrived nicely. Everything seemed to be correct, but when my colleague Lauri Rätsep, who is the one who actually works on it, started to check the hashes for what we got, then for some reason they didn't match with the ones that agency reported. And then there was a long and painstaking work to figure out what the issue is. And it seemed to be like a total mystery. We recalculated the hashes on both sides several times, and the conflict still remained. And in the end, what it turned out to be was a hardware issue. So the memory, the RAM, random operating memory, random access memory in the computer of my colleague turned out to be faulty. So it did these cryptographic calculations to get the hashes in a wrong way. But it was not obvious because the computer was otherwise like fully functional. No other problems anywhere else except in calculating hashes with this specific algorithm. And when this was detected, the problem was immediately solved. The hashes started to match right away. But yeah, as you pointed out, issues with lack of human resources, a lot of human resource, of Lauri's resource, went into digging this little error out. So that's our life. Basically, we move from one challenge to another, and so far relatively successfully. I think we have managed to tackle most of them, and some are still in the works, and the future will bring more new ones.
Thanks, Koit. So we come to Boris Domajnko. So Boris, given your technical expertise and long-standing involvement in IT support for electronic archives, how do you assess the current limitations of tools in terms of validation, metadata extraction, and dealing with large complex objects?
Well, these tools exist on the micro level, and we can use it in the archives. But the problem is when we do structural test or check the content, the semantic check, if we find a problem, what can we do? Because in the archive, we are not supposed to fix the data. If there is some year 1055, and it should be 1955, we are not supposed to correct it. So even if we had resources to do all these validations, it is better that the creator will do these checks, because they can also fix the data. But if you ask them to do it at the end of the life cycle of their database, they're not interested anymore. You say your dates or whatever has a lot of errors, yeah, that's how it is. So when should they do it? When they're interested in it, this is when they build the system. This means that archival by design, again, we should emphasize that this is the solution. When they prepare the design, when they build the system, all these checks need to be built in, all export possibilities need to be built in, because all later tasks are at the stage which is too late to be fixed.
Maybe.
It's not a problem of the tools.
Oh, sorry, you have to press again.
Not a problem of the tools themselves, but when to use these tools.
And Maybe so a follow-up question on the validation and metadata extraction. So you mentioned in your talk previously, you mentioned the KISS principle, no? That you like applications to be maintainable, simple, etc. But at the same time, you need to cope with an increasing set of requirements. So how do you feel that? Do you also see a tension there that this is sometimes difficult to keep it simple?
If it is not simple, then in the future you have many databases. So if they are not simple, it will be complicated to maintain everything. So you should try to make it simple. But if we talk about the data spaces, they should be simple to understand, simple to implement. Otherwise, people will think this is something for PhD study, not for our local project, for example. So we need these definitions, but they need to be usable. Because when you have some public procurement, somebody will need to follow these guidelines. If they will not understand them, they will not be implemented well. This is our future, but these definitions are now being defined. As I see, I'm not part of data spaces, but it's going on.
Thank you. I would like to come back to the international perspective from the Database Archiving Working Group, Isabel. So as co-chair and co-developer of the upcoming CEART handbook, what is your broader vision for the group's role in shaping international cooperation, resource sharing and practical standards in database preservation over the next few years?
Yes, so I'm not sure that vision is really the way to describe it. So I'd like to see the group continue to grow, and I'd like us to go on doing what we have been doing so successfully, and also see more of the pleasant side effects that we've had. So there's been a lot of discussions around the group about, for example, GDPR and archives, because having so many different nations in one group makes it very easy to contact those who might know more about other things that are not exactly part of what the group itself is about. I came originally from an environment where, because there was a common language, there was a lot of practical and informal interchange between archives in the US, in Canada, the Caribbean, the UK, Ireland and Australasia. And I think this kind of informal approach can help European archives to become more networked with each other and with the outside world. I think that would be a great improvement, because archives tend to be too siloed, I find. And also, networking with other archives is very helpful, because it helps archivists emotionally to discover that other archivists in other places are struggling with the same huge challenges that they are. So there's that side, but there's also the advantage that it helps to avoid the danger of reinventing the wheel, which can and has happened. So in terms of sharing information, we're going to go on doing what we have done so far in the group, so sharing our information with each other. So that's another reason to get involved. And we're also going to share the group's expertise in the form of the handbook. The handbook may itself end up being a sort of a standard. That would be good, but otherwise we'll continue to help the formation of standards by providing our practical expertise. And one of the strengths of the group, which occurred to me when Koit was speaking, was that an informal approach helps you to react to the unpredictability of the problems that pop up. So you don't have to wait for months to get your problem on the agenda. You can just talk about it in the group's next discussion, and that, I think, is a great strength of the group. So I think that's probably about it in terms of my vision. Thank you.
Thanks. I would have a follow-up question on the scope. How do you, because you described it in a way that it was more or less self-organized, no? But how do you define the scope, and how do you draw the borders to make clear what the group is actually dealing with?
Yeah, so basically it's about databases, and it is mostly focused on CEART, but we have had talks about other things. So I would say the core focus is on eArchiving because it is such a simple way to deal with a really complex problem. And basically anyone who's involved with this problem is welcome to join. So it's focused on databases and mostly focused on eArchiving, but that doesn't mean that if you have done CSV database archiving, we don't want you to be involved. So yeah, it's pretty liberal, but I think it's also quite clear what the focus of the group is. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel. So I would come back to Jan. So drawing from your experience in both policy development and practical digital transfers, so what lessons have you learned about achieving interoperability?
Well, the business of interoperability that we're in at the National Archives, I'd say, is interoperability between the IT systems of today's digital government and the future. And the method that we have chosen to achieve that interoperability is to export data into a system-independent archiving format, in our case, CRDK for databases. We also have archiving formats for documents, et cetera, et cetera. And, well, one lesson learned is that it's possible, but also that the time where you export data from a current IT system and into something that can be archived for interoperability with the future is a moment of great risk, because there are many things that can go wrong when you export data from a system. You need the right amount of space, but you also need to focus on the migration errors that can happen, et cetera, et cetera. So one thing that we have learned, and in some cases learned the hard way, is that for this to work in practice, you need to be super focused on the quality assurance of the data that are submitted to the archive. We need to make sure that we test everything as thorough as we can. And sometimes we discover new mistakes that we didn't know could happen, and then we might have not checked for them before, but then we will check for them in the future. And also, I think that Boris had a really good point about the right time to think about this is not really when you export data into an archival format. The right time to think about this is when you take a new IT system into use. I remember when I was a very young archivist, I sometimes discussed with agencies how to export data, and they were like, we know that the system works, we have absolutely no idea why the system works, how it works, or how to export data from this particular system. We have then implemented regulations that require for the agencies to notify us when they take new IT systems into use, so that we can make an appraisal decision up front. And if it's some data that should be preserved, then we need to be in a discussion about how to make sure that data can be exported in the right formats with the right documentation, et cetera, et cetera. So to think ahead is really also a super important lesson I think we have learned. And then to focus on the documentation, because when you take data out of an IT system, it will have to live on its own, so to speak. So the job of the archives, but also of the agency, is, of course, to make sure that it's documented in a way so that we can actually achieve this future interoperability and be able to access and use the data that are submitted to us. And also, one last point, also again from Boris, it was very interesting. Again, we can use that the agencies realize now more and more that they sometimes need the information themselves. So when we were in a situation where they said, well, here's some data, do with them what you want. Now they are, where are our data? We need them. Why is this documentation so bad? Why is, well, we say, well, it's, maybe you should think about this for the next submission to the archive. So that's also an important point.
But I have a follow-up question to you. So, because you know both sides, no? So you know how the things are archived, how you, which standards you use, etc. But you, as head of data science, you know the consumer side, and you know what is required and what should be delivered, and that it is useful, etc. What is your experience in that what is delivered is actually really coping with the requirements of the users?
Well, in many cases, what we see are quite simple user needs. They need a particular document or a particular piece of information. They want access to their own examination record or whatever. So those types of needs are relatively simple to fulfill. Where we see more complicated issues is where we have researchers who want several types of data to answer their research questions. And there, definitely, again, documentation is always key. The ability for the archives to give the users what they need is so much based on that we have the right documentation from the people who created data. So I think that's the main issue for us is, was the documentation good enough? And also, of course, sometimes were our test procedures good enough, because they may not always have been good enough.
Thanks. From this organizational level, we go a bit into the technical details. So first, Anders Bo. So based on your experience with eArch specifications, how do you handle data quality as a factor during appraisal? And what impact does it have on the preserving data at scale?
Well, we've all been talking about the importance of having regulation to a certain degree, to have the feasible data quality, also parts about self-interest, whether you're going to be reusing those data again later on. We should probably now focus more on some of the problems that might arise, as also we heard about from Boris, and what do you do when it turns out that we do have data which are faulty. Now, we're not going to make them perfect when they are there as a fact of how they actually administered this area. Sometimes you can really tell why the administration was not very good due to the errors that you find in their databases. So we're going to keep that. On the other hand, we need to have efficient structures. We need to have systems that can be managed by machines, not having to be able to handle all kinds of exceptions. And in order to do both things, we will have to, looking at specifications in the future, be more clear about what do we do with the exceptions, because we cannot really do much about the semantic, the errors in there. We can do something about being able to validate and make certain that the structure, the syntax, is able to be used also by a machine. So it can be things like saying we're going to have extra tables, extra rows, able to handle those kinds of data. And so far we have sometimes, I guess, been too much focused on looking at a perfect picture. So there are ways of doing that, and we're currently working with things where we can see that somehow some agencies have been able to slip through our masks, which have maybe been too loose or too strict, depending on how you look at it, and they have started to deliver data which are not able to be validated as such. Speaking about the syntax, we have seen systems where they did not have what we thought they had, maybe they thought themselves according to what they documented, namely the referential integrity control and check. So suddenly you have, if you're not very careful, a lack of references, and it could be saying that you maybe have a person, but that person doesn't have an address, or the other way around. And how do you handle that? Because you can't just go and change that, and you change the actual underlying structure. But at the same time, you want to have the structure, because otherwise you have to employ an archivist per system to be able to manage that. So the idea is naturally that you try to extract that from the sound data, but relate that to the rest of the data, saying, over here we have the exception. So that's the way that you should be thinking forward, that data are not perfect, and we have to be better at handling those filthy data that we get now and then, even though we try to avoid that in the first place. Of course, it's bad government, but bad government happens, mistakes happen, and we should be able to make so that our systems can also reflect that part. So that's a learning for the future for making our specifications. And not just ours in e-archiving, but also when it comes to data spaces. You do get filthy data you have to handle, one way or the other. You can't just get rid of those.
So what I was hearing from you and also from Boris before is that there's also a lot of ping pong with the agencies, no? Negotiation with the agencies to actually get the data in the quality you need. And what would you say in terms of tools available, tools and things that help you in performing these tasks? Would you say that this is, to some extent at least, covered?
Yeah, I think the problem is who is using the tools. And also, if we use them later in the archives, Jan mentioned interoperability. So we finally ingest some database, but later we're enriching the data. Maybe we will do one day artificial intelligence face recognition and some summaries created, so they will not be created on the fly, but it will be added to our AIP package. So we also need to find a way how to append data to the representation package. These are new metadata that will occur during time. We don't know which technologies will follow. Now we're talking about AI, but who knows? So this data will be added to our AIP package from time to time. And we know what was ingested, what we got from the creator. We checked the hash, so don't change this data, but we will add representation information. So when somebody will search, will use this data, will get more information and will also know how this information was generated. It is just some additional extracted technical metadata, or is it something by AI, for example? So how to store this and make it available for interoperability so that other tools, when they emerge, will be able to get this metadata and process them.
Thanks, Boris. So I think there's time for a last question to Koit from a technical perspective. So when working with the government agencies in Estonia, is your experience particularly around IT security concerns?
This question keeps coming up with them. Some of them are very fearful, or some others are very bound by strict rules that they have in place. And we are trying to mitigate it using organizational methods. For instance, we have this system of, I would say, customer managers. Officially, they are called archival inspectors or archivist inspectors. So each agency is designated their own person who works with this agency usually for a long time, sometimes many, many years. So they get to know the people well, and that reduces the fear. So they can then more easily absorb the information that we give them. And then also when we start an actual database ingest, we explain the process and explain that you don't need to attach our tools, this database preservation toolkit, directly to your production system. You can do it in a separate environment, and actually we advise you to do it separately on a cloned version of the database. So the security risk is already significantly reduced. But I mean, it's not a battle that we have already, or a war that we have won. It still is an issue. For instance, right now we are for the third week already waiting for permission from the population registry to allow us to use FTP transfer process to get a test snapshot, which actually doesn't contain any real data. It's all synthetic data just for test purposes, but they still need to get the permission from the higher up to use this technology of secure FTP, which should be relatively decent, but still they're afraid. So we keep working on it.
Thanks a lot, Koit, and a big relief that there's still room for human trust in this world. So thanks a lot to this panel for participating in the roundtable, and thank you all for listening and your attention.